Hi. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the June OpenLineage monthly meeting. As a reminder, like every time, this call is being recorded. So, if you don't wish to be recorded, you don't have to turn on video or anything or speak, and this is okay. If you miss the meetings, you can always consult the recording after the fact, along with the notes on the OpenLineage wiki on the LFAI and Foundation wiki. So we start those meetings with roll call. So I'll go quick over the members following the order, like the attendees following their order on my screen. So could you please quickly, just say who you are, why you're interested in the project, and if there's any topic you want to be added to the last part of the meeting, which is the open discussion. So any topic, if there's a bug you want fix, if there's a review you need, if there's a question you want to ask, or if any particular more specific attention to something around the project, please mention it and we'll add it. And as usual, if you want to just be a fly on the wall and just listening on the meeting, it's also fine. You don't have to contribute anything if you don't wish to, right? If someone doesn't respond when I call their name, we just move on to the next person. So to start with, top left on my screen, I have Michael Robinson.
Hi, Michael Robinson. I'm on the community team at Astronomer, contribute to the project, and mainly that's performing releases and doing communications and DevOps, and happy to support in any way I can.
Hi, next on my screen is myself. So I'm Julian. I'm the project lead on OpenLineage and also chief architect at Astronomer. And next on my screen, I see Harel and Julian.
I'll go. I'm the other Julian at Astronomer. I'm on the product team here, focused on a lot of our developer experience and lineage data observability initiatives. So we use OpenLineage quite a bit.
And then I'll go next. I'm the other Julian. No, I'm kidding. I'm Harel. I'm on the engineering side of Julian's team. This Julian, yes, working on developer experience, observability, lineage, all the things. Excited for today's call.
And you guys are in New York, so of course you had the sirens in the background and things. Next on my screen is Maciej.
Hey, I'm Maciej. I'm software engineer at Getting Data and OpenLineage committer.
Next is Shiri. Sorry, I'm sorry, Shiri. Like there's a very weird echo going on and we can't understand what you're saying.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. My name is Shiri Cabral, and I'm a product manager at Calibra. I work on Lineage, and I also am helping to organize some of the meetups that are happening with the community.
And thank you for that. Next is Anirudh.
Hi, I'm Anirudh. I'm based out of Singapore and I'm a data engineer at Grab.
Next is John.
Hey there, I'm John Lukanoff. I'm a software engineer at Asana. Early adopter of not early adopter, but just recently adopted OpenLineage here at Asana. So just trying to stay in the loop on everything going on.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Next is Harry.
Hey, Julian. I work at a great fintech firm in Bay Area. pretty much just started increasing our lineage processes because our executives and many other executives want that kind of visibility in the data. So we are planning to use markers as a tool. So in the last step where you are going to talk about questions, if we can add markers as an open lineage and if we can talk about it, that will be great. Yeah, and I just started, adding these observability in our data.
Sounds good. Next on my screen is Anne-Marie.
Hi, I'm a research engineer with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. I work in common metadata framework, which also collects provenance and lineage for AI pipeline. And here we are looking at OpenLineage and to see what is latest there.
Welcome. I mean, nice to see you again. Corey.
Hello, I'm Corey VC. I'm a solutions architect at AWS, and I'm continuing to learn more about how OpenLineage and the community work, and hoping to show how we can integrate AWS services with OpenLineage. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Martin.
Hi, Martin Fulton. I'm from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise AI Research Lab, working together with Anne-Marie and Suparna Bhattacharya, who is also on the call. And as Anne-Marie pointed out, we are developing infrastructures for data-centric AI, including tracking metadata and lineage from AI pipelines, and using OpenLineage to interface to other frameworks.
Next is Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris Oliveris. I'm a co-founder and CTO at Home Capital. It's a fintech company. And I'm looking at OpenLineage for some of our unique use cases that we're working through in our data pipeline. So might have some questions, but mostly also listening in. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, feel free to add questions, either at the end or, throughout the meeting. And last but not least is Suparna.
Yeah, I think it's good to be back again. So yeah, and I work with Anne-Marie and Martin on ML metadata tracking and lineage tracking as part of the HPE AI Research Lab. So
Sounds good. Nice to see you again.
Same here. So we are particularly interested in these days, even more, the importance of trustworthy AI is also driving a lot more interest in end-to-end metadata tracking for AI. So hopefully that's maybe one of the directions that we are interested in, looking more deeply going forward.
Is this something, do you want to do maybe in the open discussion section, do a quick talk about this, or maybe another?
Yeah, maybe in a future meeting. Yeah, maybe in a future meeting. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I mentioned. Sounds good. So just a quick reminder before we start the meeting. Sorry, I can't see my slides because I have you all in the middle. So there's a meetings page where you can sign up for a reminder, right? Like we did a little integration, so you can get on your calendar, and then you get notified of this monthly meeting. And Slack is the main mean of communication in between meetings. This is also where we'll discuss, from time to time, we revisit the timing on like what day of the week works better or what time works better, depending on the attendees in time zones. There's a mailing list that's mainly used for announcements around new releases or events happening or things like that. We have a wiki page where the notes of this meeting and the recording gets posted, and Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube to get are used for sending information about new releases, upcoming meetings, upcoming meetups. The YouTube channel is where all those meetings get archived. And we also have a Mastodon, not yet on Blue Sky. So today on the agenda, we have a few announcements of what's upcoming interesting things in OpenLineage, and then Michael will talk about the recent releases of OpenLineage. Then we have an update from Paweł about static lineage and some of the implementation he started. It is a holiday in Poland, and so Paweł made a little recording. I see that Maciej joined anyway. We can, I'm sure Maciej will have some comments if there are any questions. And then we move on to the discussion items and the open discussion phase of things. Any questions or anything you'd like to add? If not, I'll move on to the announcements. So announcements. So we have the first annual ecosystem survey of OpenLineage that you can find on this URL. The slides will also be posted on the wiki if you want to find all the links to everything. Thank you very much to Michael, who has been driving the effort of publishing the survey. Your participation matters and it's kind of help inform a bit what the users of OpenLineage, like whether you're a consumer or producer of OpenLineage, what's your main focus, what are the main use cases and the things you care about or what's missing in the OpenLineage integration. We also had our first issue of newsletter that shipped at the beginning of the month. If you haven't signed up yet, you can find a link on the OpenLineage homepage. Thanks again to Michael. We're also driving the newsletter, and it will, for all the announcement part, like things that are happening, meetups, talks, or things you would want to participate in. This is a great place to get informed of new things or new blog posts on the OpenLineage blog, and things like that. We have 2 more meetups coming soon. So there's going to be one in New York City, which we're still figuring out the details, on June 22nd. It should be around 6 p.m. That's kind of after work, very informal things. If you want to get some FaceTime, this is a good opportunity to get to talk to each other in person. It's a lot easier to have conversation in person, and we've been trying to do a few of those, trying to move a bit. And we're going to do another one in San Francisco at the end of the month. It's at the same time of the Data and AI Summit, so it's 27 in the evening in the Astronomer office in San Francisco. The day after that, there's Willie and I are doing the talk at the Data and AI Summit in San Francisco about OpenLineage. So it's a good opportunity to meet in person, talk about what's missing in the spec, talk about what you'd like to be added, and so on. So more details to be added. Michael has been working on the organization, and thank you so much, Shiri, for participating in this as well. Any questions about the meetups? Okay, and feel free to interrupt me if you have questions and so on. So we have 3 upcoming talks that are very exciting. So Paweł and Maciej are going to present specifically about column lineage at Berlin Buzzwords, and that's in 10 days. So that's coming soon. So if you're in Europe, feel free to go to Berlin Buzzwords. It's a nice conference in Berlin, and meet them in person to talk about column lineage. Willie and I will be talking about cross-platform data lineage with OpenLineage at the Data and AI Summit. So it's kind of an overview of how to get lineage across the various integration, from Spark to Airflow to dbt to Flink and others. and doing a demo in the end of how to use markets with this. And then Maciej will also talk about the OpenLineage integration in Airflow for the Airflow Summit, and that's later in September, and that's in Toronto, if I remember correctly, in Canada, which is easier place to get to if you're not part of the visa waiver program in the US. And Canada is usually a little easier to get to at the moment. So we have a nice distribution of, West Coast, East Coast, Europe location of talks. And next, I'm going to pass the microphone, so to speak, to Michael to talk about the recent releases.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. I'll just quickly cover some of the highlights of recent releases since our last meeting, starting with 0.25.0, where we added support for merge into queries to the Spark integration. And then moving on to 0.26.0, we had a significant contribution of a FluentD proxy for buffering OpenLineage support to send events to multiple backends. FluentD, if you're not familiar with it, is a lightweight alternative to Logstash. And that's a blessing and a curse because what it lacks is a validation solution, and that was added as part of this contribution. There's more information in the README, so please check that out. We also changed something in the Python client. We're now using hatchling. And that was from first-time contributor Bernard. Thanks to Bernard for that. Moving on to 0.27.0, added an emission filtering mechanism also to the Python client. And let's see here, one more release to tell you about, 0.27.2, where we deprecated the from environment method. There was a problem with where the config was being loaded from, and that was fixed. So you can look for our next release around the beginning of July. We tend to release on a monthly cycle at the beginning of each month.
Thank you. Any questions about the releases? So there's been a couple of patch level these months. So typically, we do the monthly release, and if anybody needs a quick fix or patch level, we keep the main branch always shippable. So it's fairly easy to do patch level, commit a single bug fix and make a new release immediately if anybody needs that. So typically the process is you just ask for it on the Slack channel, and then Michael's coordinates to make it happen. Can take a few days, but usually we can make a release pretty quickly. Okay, so the next part is the static lineage progress update. So if you've been following in this meeting and on the Slack channel, I think Shiri in particular had been a big driver, asking a lot of questions and missing parts in the spec. So we've been working on adding static lineage to the project. And to give a little bit of context, originally OpenLineage focused first on runs, and OpenLineage focuses on operational lineage, on extracting lineage from everything that's running. And there's a few cases where we also have information through static lineage. So I encourage to go look at the proposal that has been approved on the OpenLineage website. And actually, let me just open it up and then put it in the chat. Here we go. So I'll add the link. This one, right? That talks about the history, what was covered, and so on. And so I add this link to the discussion. And we are going to see an update on Paweł has started actually implementing it as part of the OpenLineage spec, so extending. So here is the link, extending the spec in the OpenLineage spec. So Michael, do you want? So Paweł is on vacation today, so we recorded an update. Michael will run it. So let us know if this doesn't work too well. We'll post it also afterwards. And feel free to ask questions.
Let's see here. Apologies if it takes a minute to get this going.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paweł. I'm software engineer at Getting Data and the contributor of OpenLineage and Marquez. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it to come to the community meeting on Thursday, but I do have some interesting here to mention and describe. So I've pre-recorded this because I think it may be interesting for you to hear. So let me share my screen for a second. I hope you see it, and I hope you see my browser. And there's been some interesting topic that we have discussed for a long time within the community meetings. It's a static limit, and so far, OpenLineage was mainly used for so-called operational limits. And every Linux event we sent was run related, so it's related to a certain run of a certain job that had some input data sets, produced some output data sets, succeeded or failed. And actually, there was a need for something more. So there, for example, I can even imagine that there are data sets within an organization that someone would like to feed into Linux backends, but actually they are not being the output of any job. So there are no runs associated with them. There are data sets that are produced by some processing engines that do not support OpenLineage. So there is a lot of possible cases where one would just simply like to index a whole database or all tables within it as data sets without creating runs. And that's what this proposal is about. It's proposal 1837 that got merged 3 weeks ago. It's mainly written by Julian. And yeah, the proposal, the main idea here is how to include the new event types into currently supported. So up to this point, OpenLineage supported run event, which contained job information, run information, some input and outputs. And it required run to be a valid run event, to be a valid OpenLineage event. So yeah, it wasn't valid without a run, and that was the issue mainly. And within the proposed model, we decided to create additional event types to create a dataset event just to describe static data sets and their attributes and facets, and job events, which just contain information about job. And the crucial thing was how to make it so that one can easily distinguish one event from another, and how to make it so that we don't break the OpenLineage schema for existing users that maybe not that much interested in static metadata. So we decided to think of a way we use schema URL field, and schema URL field may contain a URL to run event definition, but it also may contain a URL to a definition of dataset event and job event. And we do make a distinction based on that field. Because otherwise those JSON have similar fields, and it could have been difficult to distinguish one from another. Now my browser shows the modified OpenLineage JSON file, so the spec that's the definition of the OpenLineage and it's the definition from where we generate the Java code and write Python client code. So it's merged today. So today is Wednesday, 7th June. So I've merged it today morning. And as you can see, the ID of the spec is 2.0. And let's see what's got changed here. So first, we've introduced the base event type just to, have all the common elements of those three event types. And the common elements are the event type, the producer, and the schema URL. Then we change the run event so that it extends the base event. So we do extension JSON schema by applying all of. So we simply moved some run event fields to base event, but don't worry, it doesn't affect the generated client code. So whatever you work, it will be fine for you. It's just a different schema definition. We've included a data event that also extends base event, but additionally, it can contain a data set, which is a static data set, which is actually for now exactly the same as the data set. And we've also included the job event that also extends base event. And it can contain similar data to run event, except for it doesn't require run to be present. And overall, this change gets affected here. We allow JSON OpenLineage event to be one of them, one of run event, doesn't event, or job event, any of them. And based on that definition, the Java client code got generated within the PR, and also we modified Python client to include all the necessary methods to be able to export static metadata. And actually, based on that, I can show you some quick demo that I've prepared in Jupyter notebooks. So it's a Jupyter notebook, and I do have a Marquez instance up and running on somewhere on a Docker. And it's the Marquez instance is running from my branch, and the changes are not merged at the moment, but they will be merged hopefully soon. Okay, so first let's look at the existing run event. So within a client, we can create a run event, emit it to an endpoint, fire, and let's see the status response codes. It's 201, which says it's created, something has been created. And if we go further, we can ask for this job, the run event job in Marquez, and we get something. I don't want to print the whole JSON, but the operation had effect. We sent run event, there's something changed in database, and so we can request it if we like. And for static metadata, the behavior for the moment is slightly different, because I think it will take much more time to implement storing static metadata within Marquez database. And the reason behind it is that Marquez database schema is kind of run ID centric, and if something doesn't have run ID, it can be a problem everywhere. But what we decided to do so far was the ability to serialize and deserialize it without modifying the database. So in this code, I'm emitting a dataset event that has some dataset information, and I'm emitting this. And instead of 201 created, I get 200 OK status code. And the response body just contains the event that I sent. And, it's good to ask a question, what's the reason to prepare such a feature? Because it does not do anything. It just deserializes the event from the JSON and then serializes it back so that we can get it back as a JSON. And actually, we've implemented it for that purpose, because it's the best integration test to verify that the schema changes we've done in OpenLineage JSON schema are okay. They are okay in the sense that there is a backend reference architecture like Marquez that's correctly decoded and encoded again. So it can distinguish from different event types, and it can serialize it back. And this thing is done within standard Jackson library and Jackson capabilities. So we didn't need to do any custom JSON stuff. Yeah, it's available within commonly used libraries. So that's the interesting thing. And the same thing applies for the job event, which we are able to create from a Python client. It's already available in Python client. Then emit the event and see that the 200 response, okay, is something we get back. So to sum up, static metadata is something that we discussed for a long time. We agreed on the proposal, and the main effort was to make it in a way so we don't break the existing usage scenarios, and we allow new event types. Today, we've merged the PR that modifies the OpenLineage schema and gives this feature within the clients, the Java client and the Python client. Additionally, we prepared some first step of the changes within Marquez to make sure that standard Jackson libraries are capable of deserializing and serializing our new event types, which means one can distinguish one from another. Thank you guys for coming. And if you have some questions, I hope the other guys will be able to answer them. Thank you. Have a great meeting. Bye.
Well, thank you, Paweł. And on that, we let the other guys answer the questions. Do you have any questions?
I do. Is the deserializing and serializing, is that a way that's kind of like converting between a static format and the current format? Or is that completely different?
So right now, the current stage of the implementation is the new events have been added to the OpenLineage spec. And in Marquez, the logic to decide which type of event is received has been added. But Marquez is not yet storing metadata when it's coming from the static lineage event, so the dataset event and the job event. So that's what Paweł was showing, is just like the serialization, deserialization is just making sure the whole implementation about receiving events, understanding the difference between run events and static lineage, the job events and dataset events are understood, and we have not yet implemented updating Marquez on incoming static lineage events.
This is probably more of a broader question for anyone who is here watching this later, but do you think there's interest in a tool to kind of convert from one format to another? Like if you're getting stuff in static format, to convert to dynamic formats that can work with existing tools that handle the dynamic lineage, as opposed to having every tool has to do what Marquez is doing, right? To say, oh, now there's another format, let's parse it. As opposed to having a tool like a pre-processing or post, depending on if Marquez's viewpoint would be pre-processing, but OpenLineage would be post-processing to say, this is a dynamic event, and if you need it in that static format or vice versa, here's how we are.
Yeah, so I mean, the model is very similar in that there's not a lot of convergence. So what was happening before in the run events, we had two types of metadata, right? Or we have two types of metadata. One is the metadata more related to the run, right? Like how many rows were returned to the output, what was the, how long it took, some information. But there were also static information which doesn't change every run, right? What data sources the data set stored into, right? It could be a Snowflake or an S3 bucket. What's the current schema of the table, and that doesn't change every time, or who's the owner of this data set. So those are more static. So what we did is the run event still has all the information. So when you provide information about the run, you can also provide information that's more static that at the same time. And then you can also, job event, the job event is really a subset of the run event, is that it's only the part of the lineage that is static, so it defines the job, and then the input data set, the output data set, what their schema is, if you want it. So what can happen is, for example, if you deployed a new job, or if you updated, let's say, a logical view in a database, you can capture that as a more static definition. And you don't have to wait until someone queries it to provide this lineage information. So in terms of translation, you could take, let's say you're someone who cares only about static lineage, and you can consume the static event. And when the run event comes in, you can say, well, I'm going to understand only the subset of the run event, which is the static part of it. And you could treat the run event as job event and keep only the static lineage part of it. If you care about run level lineage, and related to Corey's question, in Marquez, Marquez has actually 2-level lineage graph, right? Internally, it captures a run level lineage graph, where it's going to version the metadata and understand this particular run of that job, change the schema of the output table, for example. And it's going to keep that information. But when you look at the Marquez UI, it also shows you the current lineage, which is, looking at the last run, and it's going to show job to dataset lineage, which is actually the model that the static lineage represents. So you can take those static lineage events and capture that. And actually, as part of the spec, we kind of define a bit of the semantics of what that means to update a facet on the dataset, for example, outside of a run. For example, if you change the owner of a dataset, like there's an ownership facet, this still applies to all the future versions of the dataset, even if it doesn't get updated, right? Like previously, as a run, we would keep track of, those are the facets for that particular version of the dataset because we version things. And so we can look at the last version of each one. In the case of static lineage, a facet that has been added to either a job or data set applies moving forward to all the future versions until you update it, right? So I think it's just those semantics that are part of the spec to respect. It's not too complicated. And you can, a lot of systems care only about the current version of the metadata, right? They don't care too much about the history. Marcus cares about the history, and it helps with troubleshooting how things have changed over time and why something's broken because of that change. But a lot of other metadata systems care more about the current version, right? So they can just consume those this way. So that's the current understanding. And so to answer Corey's question, the Marquez UI should not change because it shows the current view. And so, of course, you can look at the history of how things change, but it would look pretty similar.
Julian, one question from the description you had just given. So say my current version, right? What's representing on Marcus UI versus my last version. Say ownership changed, right? Is there a way on UI we can set up an alert? Like, okay, if something like this changes, like column is added, right? Or say if source table column is duplicated. Can we measure the change, what we have to do if something deprecated from the source? Or how does it impact the entire system? Can we raise an alerts for that through UI?
So there's a couple of ways you could do that. So Marquez itself doesn't have an alerting feature, right? But there's a couple of ways you can do that. So one, there's a REST API in Marquez. So everything you can do through the UI, you can do through the REST API. So one way to do this is regularly check the Marquez API and see what have changed, right? You could define some logic, and you say, I want to be notifying whenever this changes, right? So you can look at the API, and Marquez will give you the version history, right? So you could check the last version from before, or you could have some logic you verify.
Okay, so we have to write on backend of Markers for that, like another service altogether. Like one service is like if we are ingesting data in Markers, one is that service like through Airflow or somewhere. We are ingesting data in Markers. Another service will be like where we are seeing all these differences. All right.
So that would be one way to do it, right? So right now, Marquez doesn't have a built-in alerting feature or like something like that.
Okay.
You know, if this is something you're interested in, I think, you know, possibly that could become part of the Marquez project, right? If someone is interested in contributing this to the project. Marquez also has a listener mechanism. So Marquez is written in Java, right? It's a Java REST API. There's a listener mechanism in it. So if you repackage your own deployment of Marquez, you can add a listener to it, and that gets called every time Marquez versions something, right? When it creates, there's a new lineage event, and it will update the jobs and dataset. You can hook some code in there if you want. So it's a little more involved, I would think. Possibly people would rather use the REST API.
Gotcha.
In there, or you know, improvement to Marquez internally, possibly. If that's something you're interested in adding to Marquez, or think a better way to add this, I mean, we're happy to help, give feedback and so on.
And you said job event, we can consider it as a static event. Dataset events are kind of dynamic events, right? Job events are pretty much like all the meta information around that, right?
So job and dataset events are more static, right? So when you send a dataset event, you'd be able to say, oh, this is the schema of this dataset at some point. Like you could imagine looking at your warehouse, and a table has been created, and you're creating the table in OpenLineage, using OpenLineage, you replicate this information, right? Or maybe you have some governance tool, and you change who the owner of the dataset is, and you want to send this information through OpenLineage. So those would be what we'd consider more static metadata, right? As like the more dynamic one is more like, oh, this table was just written to by this query, right? And that many rows were written into it, and this information.
Gotcha.
Other questions? So, and we'll share also, I think we post the recording itself separately. And so the last part with the discussion items, I think we can move to, okay, so actually, we were saying discussion items, we add Marquez as a potential item, and I think that was Chris mentioned that, right? Do I remember correctly? I forgot.
Harsh, I mentioned it.
Oh, you're sorry about that. Sorry for mixing up. I like, you know. So yeah, so what is there any other specific things you want to discuss about Marquez? So obviously Marquez is a reference implementation of OpenLineage, but there's now, you know, multiple consumers of OpenLineage, including you know, Microsoft Purview, Menta, a few others, Astronomer.
How good is Markers Elasticsearch on UI? Like say if, as I mentioned earlier as well, right? Like say on my, someone from business side, right? he or she search something like, okay, say they are interested in some sort of like finding out if this particular column is PI sensitive, PII or non-PII. Is there a way that they can figure out that meta information as well?
Yeah, so OpenLineage Marcus has a fairly generic UI, right? That lets you actually let me open up the interesting things we put. So this is a screenshot of what it looks like in Marcus, but actually, since we have a nice, if you're familiar with Gitpod, you can actually spin up Marquez UI pretty in the browser pretty easy.
I think you need to go to GitHub for that.
Yes, that's correct. Where's the, oh, here's the GitHub link. All right, so if I go to GitHub, you have here, or it is open in Gitpod. So Gitpod is this magic thing. You can, so I need to be logged in. Continue. So it's just going to create an instance of Marquez on the fly. You can also do this pretty simply. So here it's opening up Marquez and it's starting using our Docker Compose setup a Marquez instance, and it's seeding the database. So this is happening. You can also open up Marquez instance pretty easily on your local deployment using the Docker up instructions. So you can just check out the Marquez repo, do Docker up, and you'll get a local Marquez instance running in Docker. And this is basically what Gitpod is doing here. And so you can just click on that. You don't even need to open it up on your laptop. And then you can open the Marquez UI. And I think in the Marquez UI directly, so here Gitpod just spun up a new Marquez instance. And then, oh, here's the terminal, and here it's seeding the database. We have some example data that just been added to it. And so you can look at thing in there. So for example, in this food delivery example, you can navigate the Marquez UI. So what circles represent jobs, right? If it's a SQL, it will show what the SQL transformation looks like. If it's a data set, it's going to show data sets related metadata like the schema. So there's some of the metadata that gets displayed directly, and you can see the run history. So in this example, there's a single run, right? But you can see the run history of what run created that particular version of a data set, right? We're going to keep track of the versions of the data set, when the schema changed, what run modify the data set. There's a column lineage information. So where you can see, well, this particular column was coming from that column in the input for integration that capture column lineage. I don't think, if you're looking for PII tags, like you were saying, I think, so you can always, there's always a representation of the JSON view of all the metadata that has been captured. Marquez doesn't have a pretty representation of every facet yet. So it does represent like the SQL facet, does pretty show it. The schemas of a data set, it does show it. And then for all the other things, so here we're capturing the schema, the data source, the documentation facet. And so we show this information here. If you have tags on things, it would show up here at this moment. And so that's the Marquez UI is meant to be a generic way that lets you explore all of the metadata that is captured in OpenLineage, and you can navigate. So you can look at the jobs, look at the data set, You can also look at the events that have been sent. So the seed data has, like it's kind of older events.
Julian, because we are
Yeah.
on this UI, so say I want to see where all if we talk about a specific column, which all places that particular column is present, can we query that through this search? So say, for
Yes.
example, like say public driver table, if we take one column,
I
say,
think, I think there was an example on this one. So this one has column lineage. And so the example here, so there's a REST API you can query on a column, and you can see the upstream of all the columns it depending on, assuming you capture this metadata. And so what's interesting about that, if I go back to my logs, let me see, I'm going to see the lineage, the column lineage. I just want to get the column lineage endpoint that was queried by this.
It's okay.
Right, so there's a column lineage endpoint. So this is the regular lineage endpoint at the dataset level. And there's also a column lineage endpoint that is, let me open up the Marquez documentation. Marquez API doc. So here's the open API for Marquez. So there's column lineage endpoint, where you can get the column lineage, and you can say whether you want just the upstream or the downstream, right? So typically an upstream, you want to know what that column depends on all those columns upstream from all those data sets, but you can also have the downstream and what columns are derived from this particular column. So, and in Marquez, you have the UI, but you also have, if I look at the other endpoint, the API endpoint, and I can do things like, and so, I don't know, oh yeah, it does look nice. So you can have namespaces and look at food delivery, which is the namespace for this, and then you can look at the data set. And then we were looking at, actually, I can use the column lineage endpoint is, oh yeah, it's column lineage. Maybe I should not be, it's going to take a bit of time, but you can do column lineage and do query for this particular data set we were looking at. Actually, so we have lineage, and I had the lineage endpoint earlier. So you see in the logs, like the request I was just doing.
Yeah.
And you can query the column lineage endpoint to get, so here it is, lineage. To get that particular column here. So you can use this endpoint. So we are running a little bit out of time, and I haven't prepared for the actual example, but you give basically the identifier of the field as here, and then it will look up the lineage graph inside of Marquez. And so, for example, yeah.
No, this is very helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks for this. I will do my own part. You did enough.
Yeah, so
hey,
you have the, go ahead.
I was say I do have a separate question as well. I don't know, I can also stay after.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So I'm looking into lineage solutions for us here at Hum. And there was a blog post I came across, which I really resonated with me, which was, when you ask a data practitioner what they mean by lineage, they can mean a lot of different things. And it's the reason why, facets, I thought facets is a really good idea in the model. What I'm working through is I totally understand the level of granularity of column level lineage. Column level lineage, you can get a facet for that. We also have a use case where even more fine-grained lineage is important for us. So I would call that row-based lineage, right? Like given a specific row in a database, give me across the data platform all of the transformations and all of the input rows that have gone into that. Now, I guess my question is are there any facets or pre-baked metadata models that help me do this? I know that this kind of is I don't know if I know everything about OpenLineage and all the facets available, but this can grow in complexity a lot. I've looked, there's a bit of research on how to do this. And I just wanted to am I on the right track thinking about if I wanted to do this, I would do this with I would somehow create a custom facet that can describe this row level computation graph. And then I'd have to probably bake that metadata model as a first-class citizen along with the data that I'm doing computations on. Or is there another direction that people know of and have thought more about this than I have?
So typically what we're trying to keep this storage of the metadata smaller than the storage of the data itself, right? So that's where,
sure.
Yeah, in Marquez, we're capturing the lineage at the run level. So basically there's this particular batch, this particular update of the data is depending on that, and column level lineage is about the shape of the data, right? This particular column in this data set derived from that column in this other data set. So, and this applies to all the rows in the data set, of course, right? So typically, if you want lineage at the row level, I would capture that in your data model, right? So you probably have a way to add the IDs of the rows you derive from as a column in your output table so that you can capture this. Now, if you have some way to summarize this, you could capture it in Marquez as well. So for example, one thing we wanted to capture is this particular partition in the output table is derived from this particular partition in the input table, which is a very common, when people do incremental processing, they might say this hour in this input table is corresponding to that hour in the output table. And so you can have some way of summarizing that all the rows in this partition are derived from all the rows in that partition, right? So that kind of coarser grain granularity, because I mean, it depends a bit what the facet will have in Marquez. But if the facet contains all the row IDs in the output and all the row IDs in the input and how they connect to each other, it's probably going to be too much data to store in Marquez, right? Marquez is expecting to be less granular. It depends on the size of data sets. But if you have hundreds of millions of rows and you would capture one-to-one mapping from rows from table to table, is going to be too big for storing in Marquez.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have a lot more questions as well. Part of it is tracking, what are the input and output rows, and it makes sense to put that into the data model. There is sort of this standard that would have to be across our whole data platform, because I'm not only talking about, our data in a data lake, for instance, our data will be across many services, and I'm using sort of a layered data pipeline architecture approach. And I do want to track this actor got data from this core data service, did something to it, however complex that upstream flow was, and then put the data back. But there does need to be a cohesive solution to be able to stitch that all back together. But I agree that, probably not using Marquez. It's the more granular metadata store. It should probably be less granular than the actual data model.
So it's not the first time this comes up, right? I think I remember other people asking similar question. I think one thing that'd be interesting is how you connect together. Let's say if in your data model, you add information to capture row level lineage, like the output row contains reference to the row IDs of the input rows is derived from, or something like that, right?
Sure.
It would be also interesting to connect that to the lineage that is coarser grain in OpenLineage, capturing the run ID, right? This was updated as part of that run ID. And that way you can connect the metadata that is more at the raw level to the one that you have at a higher level at the run level in OpenLineage. So I don't know, I think it would be worth having maybe like a doc in OpenLineage on how to do that, or like a recommended model, if there are existing research and recommended models. Maybe, and people want raw level lineage, maybe there's some recommendation that can be there. And how to connect the raw level lineage, that probably would not be in OpenLineage, but connected to OpenLineage metadata, just like this was updated as part of this run ID or something.
Yeah, that could make a lot of sense. I mean, in that way, you're using Marquez as sort of a lookup engine to be able to stitch together all of the different flows, but at less granularity than what exists in the actual data model. So I could see that as well. This is a bit of a rabbit hole, and I've been talking to quite a few people on it. So this is also why I'm here, talking to people who probably have a lot more expertise and have thought about this a lot more than I have. So this is helpful. Is there a good place to like ask questions, and if I have further questions about stuff like this?
So the Slack channel is the best place, and I see Sergio is asking, like,
I tried to join it from the website and it said not authorized or something. It said like I'm not part of OpenLineage community or something.
Okay, so we need to check something, because so are you all using this OL Slack link that Michael just posted in the chat? And
yes, I have the same problem as Chris has.
Okay, so that's a problem. This should automatically allow you to connect, but maybe, Slack has this invite links that might have expired. So let's us fix this. Yeah, we'll fix it. And so please come back to that same link on the website a little later, and that should work then.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I'm sorry, we all need to wrap up the meetings. Thank you so much for being here. Please follow up on Slack, and we can also follow up at the next meeting. Happy to keep going on those conversations. This is a great conversation.